Awesome. Well, thank you all again so much for being here in this space with us today. I'm super honored and excited to introduce the panel today on behalf of Community Plus Values and Heritage Months, and then kick it over to our moderator here in a little bit. But first, I'm going to start with land acknowledgement. And I just want to take a moment in the spirit of healing and peace to acknowledge and honor the indigenous peoples of the land upon which the University of Denver stands, the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute tribes. Like the history of so many institutions in the American West, ours is a complex and sometimes painful history. In recognition of this fact and to underscore our commitment to inclusion and equity, we commit to listen to and affirm the stories of all in our community. And with that, I am again super honored to be able to introduce our panelists and moderator today. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Andrea Jordan Fields and all of those who put on the event on Monday on MLK Junior Day. It was so phenomenal, whether you were virtual or in person. It was just a powerful event. The music, the words, the spoken word. It was beautiful to see, and we were so glad to have that inaugural event there. And as we think about that wonderful event, today will be a Q&A and call to action around what that looks like. So we never want something to feel like a one and done. We want to make sure that we're thinking long-term about how we make change, secure justice, and really think about these pieces. And so we have an awesome panel today. First, I want to introduce Jennifer Benino. She is an attorney, or excuse me, a civil rights lawyer, legal educator, and administrator at the University of Denver Sherm College of Law. And she is also now a partner at the O'Connor Law Firm, which includes the Levitate Institute, an endeavor aimed at promoting the positive emotional well-being and growth of law students and lawyers. Most recently, at a civil rights law firm, Jennifer litigated complex civil litigation cases involving prisoners' rights, law enforcement misconduct, and employment discrimination. So welcome, Jennifer. Next, we have Nigel Daniels. So glad to have Nigel on the call. He is actually, excuse me, a 3L law student at the University of Denver Sherm College of Law and currently works for Denver Mayor Michael B. Hancock as his personal assistant. Nigel is also a member of the Black Law Students Association and the Law School Ambassadors. So welcome, Nigel. Next, we have Coach Dosha Woods. She is the head women's basketball coach at the University of Denver, and Coach Woods enters her second season at the University of Denver. She's committed to rebuilding a culture that allows her team to grow as players and people. Her emphasis can be seen and heard via various podcasts as well as TV interviews speaking of her Life 4.0 program. She developed this to provide a space to talk about mental health and social justice issues with her program. And lastly, I want to introduce Dr. Andrea Jordan Fields, who will be our moderator today. She is the Black Community Experience Coordinator at the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the University of Denver. Dr. Fields calls herself a womanist ethicist and is received her PhD from the Joint PhD program from the University of Denver and the Iliff School of Theology. Prior to being the Black Experience Coordinator at DU, she was the interim director at the University of Denver Cultural Center. Dr. Fields is a stand for all people relating to each other as equals, transcending racial, cultural, social, socioeconomic, and religious barriers. And with that, I will hand the mic over to Dr. Fields, and my camera will go off. But if you do have any questions, we will have time for Q&A. And so please feel free to drop those in the chat directly to us or through the Q&A function. And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Chase. And hello, everyone, Nigel, Coach Woods, and Jennifer. I thought I would start this section out with an excerpt from Dr. King's famous quote or famous speech, "I Have a Dream." And if you don't know, that speech, its first title was "Normalcy Never Again." And so Dr. King stated, "In a sense, we have come to the Capitol to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note in which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, Black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed in the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But it's obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note. insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check that has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity in this nation. So we have come to cash this check, a check that will give us the riches of freedom and the security of justice. And that is where the theme for 2022, we are in 2022, came for Colorado's MLK event. And so Martin Luther King Jr. has become an informal benchmark against which to measure the country's progress toward fulfilling the promise of equality and justice for all. And in his May 1957 Give Us the Ballot speech in DC, King called the right to vote one of the highest mandates of our democratic tradition. So in light of the actions, or should I say inactions, of Congress as it relates to voting rights, I would like to start our conversation here about voting rights. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 is a landmark piece of federal legislation in the United States that prohibits racial discrimination in voting. It was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson during the height of the Civil Rights Movement on August 6, 1965. Congress later amended the act 5 times to expand protection. But in May of 1957, King put his finger on problems that strikingly mirror challenges of today. Dr. King called for a president and members of Congress to provide strong moral and courageous leadership for a situation that could not be permanently evaded. So while on Monday, Representative Harrod celebrated Colorado's voting rights efforts, why do you believe that 57 years later, the Voting Rights Act is in jeopardy? And let's start with Coach Woods.
I was hoping you start with Jennifer since she's the law and
Well, we can switch, Jennifer.
Yeah. Yeah. Jennifer, if you don't mind starting, because I feel like I'm going to give you a layman's coach's answer, but I feel like between you and Nigel, y'all can take a little bit more legal stance with it, and then I could circle back around.
Yeah, and that's cool, but we also want to know how the regular citizen feels about this Voting Rights Act, because it affects us all. But we'll start with the legal people first. Jennifer.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, and great question, and thanks for having me today. I think that the voting rights is in jeopardy really broadly because there's a refusal to live out the vision of that beloved community, but also more specifically because there's an unraveling of our democratic norms taking place right now. You need look no further than January 6th or earlier this week or yesterday, what has happened. And in terms of the law, in my view, there has been a premature and concerted, deliberate effort to displace the accountability measures in place to ensure that states are justly providing the franchise to all people equally. But also more specifically, there's a refusal to dismantle some of the procedural mechanisms like the filibuster on the legislative end. The John Lewis Voting Rights Bill was so important, especially since the US Supreme Court decision, that Shelby County decision, basically gutted those pre-clearance requirements of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, leaving tons of people, vulnerable people, without accessible franchise. So here we are today in the position that we're in. Thank you again for such a wonderful question.
Wow, thank you, Jennifer. And so Nigel, building on that question, and also now we know that a lot of the states have changed this law to where you will be in jeopardy of going to jail if you give someone who's standing in line a bottle of water. Speak to why 57 years later, this is true.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for having me. And I think it's a great question. I think it's fitting for the times that we're in. It's unfortunate that 57 years later that we're even having to have this conversation. I think a lot of us hoped and dreamed that, like Martin Luther King did, that when we made these big changes at the federal level, that they would be permanent and not be kind of ripped apart, as Jennifer kind of alluded to earlier. It's interesting because I think, just like Jennifer said, there is a fundamental, I guess, assault against our voting rights right now taking place in cities and states across this country. And it's not so much in Colorado, and it's great that we're able to celebrate, the great things that Colorado has done to protect our voting rights. But we even have here attempts to take away voting rights. So we're not immune to this assault that's taking place across the country in any way, shape, or form. However, what I think is driving it, and I tend to always bring a little political lens to it, so I'll be careful and I'll preface everything I
Bring your
say.
truth.
But I think, particularly what we saw in 2020, and this, if we have lost the meaning of fact and what it means to have facts be facts and mean something in this country, then it questions our democracy to some degree. And at this point, when you've got half of the country that believes that our election had fraud in it, and we had all of this question about what happened, and in reality that's just not true, and it's been proven time after time by courts, it's been proven by facts, even by folks who have made those allegations that had a chance to go back and review them, have come back and said, you know what, we're wrong. And so, but that's not the case today, right? You still have a significant amount of the Republican Party that believes that the election was stolen, and even despite all of that reality. So I think we're dealing with a bigger issue underneath the surface, in terms of voting rights. I think you could talk about racial inequality. I think we could tie in all sorts of bigger issues into that same underlying issue, if that makes sense. But focusing in on voting rights, I think people realize that there's power in voting, and they want to rip that away, and that's always been the case historically. That's what Martin Luther King walked for and stood for. But I was at the parade on Monday, and I'll shut up after this story. But it was interesting because I had a conversation with it was the Republican committee that were standing across the street, and I had my NAACP shirt on with a bunch of other members, and we had our flag, and we're taking pictures. And of course, they came across the street, and I said, well, let's do this, right? So let's have this conversation. And they hit me with the whole, well, we're members of the NAACP, we stand for equality, this and that. And then I said, well, that's great, but at the same time, as we're having this conversation, we actively currently have members of people of the party that you believe in tearing apart these rights, across this country and in DC. And the fact that you're even having to justify that, like, the eating in line law, and they came at me about like, oh, well, there's limitations around when you can be arrested or cited for eating or serving food in voting lines. There's limitations around like voter restriction ID laws. And I'm like, we wouldn't even be having these conversations if this was Dr. King's world, right? So like the argument's just flawed at the surface. Anyways, that's my rant. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And so, Coach Woods, you heard what Nigel said, and we know he said that we wouldn't even have these conversations if it was during King's time. But think about it, during King's time, prior to getting this to happen, people were being hosed down by fire hose and dogs biting, and people standing in line to just eat in Woolworths, people standing in line to vote, and we had all of these little strategies of containment to keep people out of that process 57 years ago. And we thought that when King, I think it was 1965, when they signed the act, that we had our voting rights and it was forever. And so we're in 2022, 57 years later, and we're in the same place. Speak to that, Coach.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what Nigel said. Is just like people want to keep the power and the status quo. And I think, for where we are in 2022, I think people are so threatened by equality that just because I have the right to vote or you have the right to vote, that doesn't mean the next person, if they're white or whatever, is going to lose anything, right? I think too much now in 2022, we feel like if there's going to be equality and equity across the board, that means you're going to take something away from me. When, as I say, there's room for everybody at the table, right? And if there's not room for you, bring your own seat. And I think as people of color, Black people, we're okay with bringing our own seat, but just let us sit down. Just let us sit down and be, in these conversations. And I think, that the voting right is one of those things we saw over time, that they tried different strategies to try to make it seem like we can't vote. A personal story, my sister spent 2 years in prison when she was 19 and 20. She voted for the first time in 2016. And I think she got out maybe in 2021. But it took her literally almost 3 years for a crime that she did when she was a teenager to even get a voting right. And the crazy part to me is she's always held a job with help of family. They were quick to take her taxes, right? They're quick to take her taxes. They're quick to treat her like a regular citizen. And then when it comes time to vote, and a senator spoke about this on Monday, just with her work with incarceration. And I just think it's just another piece that we know that Black people are more incarcerated than any other race. And it's just another way to just take away rights. It's like, we're going to put you in prison so you can get rehabilitated, and then constantly have this scarlet letter on you. And I know these conversations, though they may get older, are just very necessary, and for people to kind of keep the conversation going, that we want to show up to the table. We don't want to take your seat. We want to just the same opportunity as you do. And you can't pick and choose when you want us to be citizens and not. You can pay your taxes but not vote.
You can't pick and choose when you're going to let people be citizens. That is so true. And anyone can jump in for this. This is the last question or comment on the voting rights question. But what do you say to when you see on CNN and MSNBC where Congress people are saying the Voting Rights Act worked? You had a Black president, you had Obama, and now you have a Black vice president. So it's clearly working for people. What do you say to that?
I think it's, being the first Black female coach here at DU, I think we have to be careful, women's basketball anyway. I think we have to be careful when we say, well, you got your one. It's like, you got your one. Well, there's 3 Black females right now on this call, that only one of us deserve to be here. I think it's too easy for us to say, just because you got one and because Obama made it to where he was, and it's easy for us to, well, see, there you go. Well, everybody wants that same opportunity too. Like, we don't just get one, they get a few, right, as we've seen in history. So I think it's, the audacity to think that we have to settle for just one, and we're supposed to, okay, it's to take our ball and go home because you gave it to us. It's like, we also want the generations behind us to be able to aspire for something more.
Thank you. Well said. And that is the key for the legacy that we're leaving. How do we have a legacy if we're not allowed at the table to create those legacies? Thank you, Coach. So my second question, on Monday, we had Rabbi Black, who shared a song he wrote with Steve Borowski in 2007. And the song is on a CD entitled Together as One, New Songs of Social Justice. And one of the songs in the CD is entitled Praying with Our Feet, or Praying with My Feet. And the reason the rabbi wrote the song, he said that it was based on Rabbi Dr. Abram Herschel, who marched in Salem with Dr. King on a Saturday morning. And when he was asked by his congregation, why are you not in the synagogue praying that day instead of marching, he replied, when I march in Salem, I am praying with my feet. What does praying with your feet mean to you in the 21st century in light of BLM marches and other protests? Jennifer.
Sure, I guess I would say, as a person of faith first, as a wife and a mother second, and a civil rights attorney, that I guess my affirmation is always that I sort of place my actions into eternity. So I think that praying with our feet means to act deliberately, to not be an ideological bench warmer, to shift culture, to resist, and to practice what we preach, to co-create and make lasting change. And I think that means solidarity with all affected communities.
Thank you. Solidarity with all communities. And so Coach, when you think of praying with your feet, and that's talking about, you know, what people have done for centuries. And the BLM, we focus on them and their marching and other protests. What do you see as praying with your feet?
You know, in America, we have, you know, anytime something happens, a tragedy, we always say, you know, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers. And it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what it is, if it's a shooting, if it's a fire, what it is, it's thoughts and prayers. And I think when it comes to social justice and this song, praying with your feet, I think people are so comfortable saying that because at the end, that's what we all kind of know to go to, right? We're going to keep praying. But I think for us is to keep moving forward, you know, keep your feet moving forward, however frustrating it may get, however defeated you may feel at times, that, you know, there was a legacy before us and they've passed on that same resilience and passion. I always love when people say, you know, if you're born into a family of wealth, you're born with a silver spoon and you have these things handed down. Well, unfortunately for us as Black people, you know, we're born basically into a life of resilience, right? That's what's been passed down to us from our ancestors. So for us to keep it going, to keep moving forward, to keep trying, though it may not look like it did in 1965, we're 57 years later. This is us showing up, dancing, praying with our feet to try to make a change so that the next generation or the person next to us at work will feel comfortable praying with their feet and showing up to the table.
Thank you. Nigel, what do you see? What do you think of when you hear that, you know, was it in 65, 67, the rabbi shared that, you know, hey, I'm not going to be in the synagogue. I'm going to be out there with the people.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's interesting that he made that quote in response to a synagogue, I believe. And that's, you know, I think highlighting the significance of solidarity, kind of what Jennifer was alluding to. It's just like the importance of saying, hey, yes, I'm doing this and y'all need to be out here doing it with me and stand by the values that I stand by. And I think that, you know, bringing that down to today, I think we saw a lot of that happen throughout the summer of 2020 with George Floyd and the protests throughout the country where people came out, and a lot of folks, sure, you could give credit to COVID and all the other factors that were going on, but you saw a lot of first-time people get out there and march and speak and challenge their peers to do more. And we still see remnants of that today. So I think I think he was very insightful and forward-looking in that quote.
Thank you. Nigel, you mentioned George Floyd, and when we think about it, when people in essence prayed with their feet, it wasn't just in the United States. That was an act that happened around the world. How do you feel about that? What do you think? Do you think that national movement, because of the injustice, did that make a difference in the results of that case, do you think?
Yes and no.
Okay. All right.
I would just be optimistic pessimist, right? I think that yes, we've seen significant changes in some areas, even here at DU. However, that does not mean that the work is done. And I think I read a report from New York Times that said that the support for Black Lives Matter, you know, it peaked through 2020. But then when we hit, I think it was, I'd have to pull the report to get it correct, but basically it was about a year after, significantly dropped, right? And I always like to remind people that, you know, before 2020, Black Lives Matter was not necessarily welcomed by everybody.
Right.
We had been Black politicians that were scared to say it. So we've come some way, we have not come all the way. And I think this is just another step in the process.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on it? Go ahead.
I just want to add, you know, I think that the other part when we talk about praying with your feet or people showing up, that I don't even know if it's called a transition, but as we keep these conversations going, is to be okay if somebody prays differently than you, right? Be okay with how we all want to show up to the table, right? Even on the call, the four of us on this panel, we all identify as Black, but maybe we all want to show up in a different way. Maybe you're comfortable being on the front lines a lot more vocal. Maybe I'm comfortable being behind the scenes. And I think that we have to be okay with how people are comfortable playing with their own feet in their own space. As long as they want to show up and show some growth to get better, I think we have to also be okay with that.
Excellent. And in fact, there's a quote that Dr. King has about move. And he said, if you can't walk, crawl. If you can't crawl, do something, but keep moving. And so that is the point, that regardless, we got to, and we must keep moving for justice sake. And so my next question, Representative Herrick challenged us being DU, to make sure that this MLK event is not a one-time event. What are immediate steps we can take as a community to continue to sustain the synergy or momentum? And then the second part of that question is, then what are a couple of long-term goals? So I want short-term goals, steps now, and then long-term goals can we do, or should we aim for towards this, keeping the synergy going? And Nigel, I'll let you go first.
Sure, I'll jump in. I think short term, I think if we're talking about equity, access to justice, and just broadly speaking about the pillars of Martin Luther King Jr., I think here at the university, is that the question?
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm a big proponent of us doing more for the community of Denver. I think we have a diverse community here in Denver that doesn't reflect the student body or the faculty at DU, and that's in multiple schools. And I think, deliberate outreach and making sure that we're doing anything we can to get folks from the state and from the city, specifically the city, but from the state, to go here, because it's a tremendous school, and you have folks on the East Coast who come across the country to go here. And it's very disappointing being a Denver native, seeing the lack of outreach that's done to the community. So that's my rant on the short term. In the long term, I think, I'm an optimist in the sense that I've heard there's been a few announcements of institutes coming up and being developed to attack social justice and things of that sort. I think if there's things that DU could do to support that and support educating either, young people, pick a demographic. It could be young people, it could be law enforcement, it could be whatever, to educate them and instill some social justice values into the community. That would be a tangible long-term goal.
Excellent. Now, since you work for the mayor, for the government, do you want to share, what do you think for the actual Denver community also?
Sure. In terms of the city in broader sense, I think,
Yes.
I think that we all have to, I think when you talk about the city and the local government, I think the issue of equity comes down to issues like, homelessness and housing and even voting rights to some degree, a little bit less on the local, like Denver local level, but more so on the state level. But you do have overlap. And I think that it just highlights the importance of government and governments in people's lives. And the biggest way that people can have an impact and influence on that is by voting. And that's how you make your voice known on all of those different stances. And so I think, the mayor of Denver, and, he's always been committed to expanding voting rights and making sure that it's equitable and people have access. We do the Sold to the Polls on Sunday during the campaign season. We're all about it. But there's that's not true everywhere. And so we're lucky here.
Right. Thank you. So Coach Woods, same question. So what are immediate steps we can take as a community to continue and sustain the synergy or momentum that we started on Monday?
Yeah, I think probably first is just communication. I attended the inaugural event and I thought it was, phenomenal by you and your staff of just to kind of bring something. And obviously because of COVID, we have some other factors. So I don't want us to also judge ourselves too harshly, right, about the response, because we are still in a pandemic. But I think communication is probably the biggest key, because, you know, going into my second year being here, I feel like there are steps to use trying to make, we all just don't know about it, right? We don't know it either until it's too late. So somehow that communication, if it can be streamlined a little easier. And then I would say my second, which I've said this from day one, is just more collaboration, right? Collaboration. It was nice, honestly, to attend the program and to see that our game on February 19th, our Unity game that we'll have at 2 p.m. versus Omaha, who also has the other Black female head coach in our conference, that Unity game also mentioned, to kind of give people something to look forward to. So I think things like that we can continue to do just to kind of bring awareness. And then when you do make plans to attend, bring somebody, right? Bring a friend who may not have access to. I know this summer our team went to the Juneteenth event put on in the Commons, and to hear both our Black kids and white kids learn something for the first time. So I think really trying to do a better job of communicating to the area that you're in, to the people that you interact with, and then the students. And then I think to add to that, the long-term goal is just us, again, to collaborate more, that we can, you know, maybe you don't have the funding for everything. Maybe we can collaborate here and to make it a little bit more, whether it's somebody that people know or a conversation that people can sit down and have, but a little bit more collaboration. I think we can make steps a lot further, because I feel like each kind of individual department is doing something, and then their usual same people show up. So if we can kind of reach out and pull some other people in, I think we can just kind of expand and keep these conversations going.
Great. Communication and collaboration, and they are key. As far as the event on Monday, so we had approximately 210 in person, and then there were like 264 who were on the webinar. You know, we had like 3-something registered. But again, you're right, getting the information out and making sure that every department, all of the silos, are aware of what's going on so that we can support each other is very much key. So Jennifer, what are the immediate steps we can take as a community to continue and sustain the synergy or momentum that we've started?
Sure, I would echo everything that Nigel and Coach Woods shared, particularly about community and communication. You know, I'm kind of like the wellness DEI person. So for me, it's just to infuse every aspect of our academic life with culture, with kindness, with joy, to be radically welcoming of everyone, to take those extra steps when you see someone. I was getting my COVID tests out there at the pod yesterday, and someone said they were just so happy to see me. It was a person of another diverse identity, and we spoke for a minute, and it was good to just have that connection and that solidarity. But I think in the long term, I think that some of our DEI efforts obviously have to include a justice component, and really highlight belonging, cultural change, like in the way that we do things where it's appropriate. I think centering the margins is always going to be something that's important that we do. And I think that's not just kind of focusing on the numbers of the people who are there, although that's important, or training, but and even moving from the place of inclusivity to a place of solidarity, and then finally mutuality, and seeing each other as one another in community. And so that's what
you put a lot of them in there. I don't think I can get all of them. Yeah, thank you. You said, you know, that we need to be radically welcoming, which is a novel idea, right? When you invite people into your home, you know, radical hospitality is an awesome thing. That means going out of your way to make sure that people feel like they are welcome. And then you talked about justice and how we need to be committed to justice. And then, so again, that conversation about belonging, having a sense of belonging, and then centering the margin. And I don't even know if people really understand when you say centering the margin, what do you mean when you say center the margin?
So centering the margins is historically something that was a theory that was coined by the late Bell Hooks, who I absolutely adore, and all of her work. But it is about looking first at who's values and whose standards are being centered, and then who might be excluded by way of those values that are being centered, and then turning it around almost like a 360, and then centering those people who, whereby those standards that we have are now centered, who would be excluded are now centered. So I hope that made sense, but it is,
Excellent.
yeah.
And there was the last, one of the last points you made, you said moving from inclusivity to mutuality.
Yes.
Yes. And so, and when we think about that, you know, we like to say diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
So we're all about inclusion, but you threw something, a hook in there. You said mutuality. Tell us what you mean by mutuality versus inclusivity.
It means, I would say, instead of inclusivity, meaning bringing someone to the table, but maybe not them not necessarily belonging. Whereas mutuality is a joint recognition that we are bound together and that our interests are such that we need to work together.
Right. And in short, seeing the humanity in each other, huh?
Yes, yes.
Wow, what a novel idea. Seeing the humanity in each other. So one of my, we're sort of going to wrapping up here. On Monday, our Vice Chancellor of DEI, Dr. Witt, shared about how Dr. King was a truth teller and a justice fighter, and how truth tellers call you into accountability and often live in isolation because of their truth telling. We'd also stated that we need to support and rally around our truth tellers. Justice must be our goal, he said. So in the academy in general, and in the not the United States, but in the University of Denver specifically, what are the truths we need to tell? And how do we need to tell and engage them so that we can shift from division to unity? Not conformity, but unity that reflects intercultural and intergenerational within our beloved community. And that was a long question. But the last part of it is, you know, what is it? What are the truths we need to tell? And then how do we engage those truths so that we can shift and transform the academy in general, but University of Denver specifically?
I'll try to tackle this one first. I think, you know, just speaking here in athletics, right? We want a more diverse student body, right? We want a more diverse. I think to continue to talk about different ways that we can close the gap and make it a little bit more accessible to students. You know, we don't have your typical sports that are super diverse in a sense of, you know, we have hockey and lacrosse. We don't have necessarily a football team or something like that that's going to bring more diversity. But I also don't think that means that just because you're on the hockey team, you don't want to learn about diversity. You know, they're doing a RISE program and they're also doing their part. So I think for us to have more conversations that just because we're not there yet in terms of attracting a lot of people of color, I think we can also talk about, or students of color, we can also talk about what we're doing to then incorporate that in the future. I think trying to diversify, again, that can be a lot of different things, not just your race, your religion, your sexual orientation, a lot of different affinity groups that we can continue to highlight and bring awareness to. So when people are looking here at DU, that they can see themselves in some capacity. And I think too many times some of those groups are hidden, and people may make assumptions. You know, I know like getting the job here at DU, people are like, I spent 10 years in New Orleans at Tulane, and they're like, you're going where? Like, are there Black people up there? And you know, and I've been, for me personally, since coming to DU, I've never not felt comfortable. I've never not felt like I hadn't belonged. I'm also a person that I always say you'll find what you're looking for. But I think in doing research for the job, there was a ton of affinity groups, maybe too many, honestly, if we can kind of condense those so people know where to look. But I think there's a lot of work being done. If we can kind of just, as I said before, communicate and reach out, whether it's obviously you're not lessening your standards, but changing the ways that we target and recruit people so they know that we're here and we're accepting and we're accessible.
All right. So Coach, so there's a question that was asked too. So and I think it's related to telling the truths. It said, we often hear, and not just DU, but athletes are thought to just play, just keep winning. But how can we push back against that and understand that athletes are human beings and they're not just our commodity to make us look good as far as athletics?
That's a good question. Well, we're not doing a lot of winning right now, so I can tell you.
Well, I mean, women and men. So the men,
Absolutely.
men on a little roll right now.
Yes, but I think in general, I think it's important for us in the positions of power, us coaches, to establish that. That was also part of the reason I created the Life 4.0 program, is for our student athletes to know that they do have a life outside of their sport, that the sport is a means to them obviously getting here. But it's important as coaches that we establish a boundary. We talk all the time about the athletic, academic, and then the social side, and been able to make sure that they have time to experience those three things. So I think it's a lot of the boundaries that we can kind of set as coaches. And then I think, this generation is different, is to also communicate with, if you feel that way as an athlete, that, you want to make sure that it's bigger than your sport or bigger than your game, and you feel like you're just showing up to practice. I think communication is important, because as much as we try to establish those channels of communications, we don't see everything as coaches. And as I just told my team this morning, we're not mind readers, so just let us know, and we can be very accommodating to make sure that they have time to attend something outside the sport, and to be involved in something. I would say both our Unity game and our Pride game that we're doing both in February were student led. It was something that my team brought to me that was important to them, and so just that communication, I was able to use my position of power and push it through for them. So that's just one example, but I think just also communicating is extremely important, whether you're an athlete or just a student. There's a lot of people that are here wanting to help, but they can't help what they don't know.
So excellent. And so I hear over and over with you, the truth we need to tell, but it's about communicating. We got to have those conversations. And so Nigel, same question. So, in the academy in general, in the University of Denver specifically, what are the truths we need to tell? And then how do we need to tell them and engage in such a way that we shift the culture?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think, me personally, I think the truths that we need to tell come from honoring our history and recognizing our history at DU. I love that we had the land acknowledgement at the beginning. I think that's a huge piece of this university's history that we don't always reckon, and we need to reconcile with. But I think it goes deeper beyond that, because I think the university also has a deep connection to slavery. And so there's things there that need to be reckoned and talked about, and those truths need to be told. But it kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is like, we have to just tell history and teach history the way that it's supposed to be taught, and accurately. Especially if we're going to be a university, I think we have a duty to tell that story. Um, what I do think, though, is that when people do tell their truths, and I feel this as a student, in classrooms or in meetings and whatnot, when you speak against things, I think you do feel isolated. And I think, I think as someone who has spoken up before, but also has been silent when others have spoken up, and it hasn't been welcomed, I see the impact of that, and I felt the impact of that. And I think that, us as, Black people, or people who are always called to the table to talk about diversity, or, inclusivity, or I love Jennifer's transition from inclusivity to mutuality. I'm going to use that. But like, we're always at the table talking about these issues. And I think that the mutuality world that you're talking about, Jennifer, is kind of that space where that burden doesn't exist, but everyone is reckoning with that same history, and we can all kind of move forward with it. But I don't know how we get there, so I'll just stop talking. But I kind of just threw a lot of stuff.
Okay, but we got to think this through, because how do we get there? Because you and your undergrads, you are our future. You're the legacy that we're looking for to carry us to the next level. So we got to think about it. So Jennifer, same question. in the academy, and you work in the law school in general, and then at the University of Denver specifically, what are the truths we need to tell, and how do we need to tell them to engage them in such a way that we shift the culture?
Absolutely. I would definitely agree with Nigel in saying that the lack of diversity in the history need to be acknowledged. And specifically in my capacity, I think that one thing that helps is in interacting with students when they sense that nice racism or that aversive racism that Robin DiAngelo talks about in her books, to affirm that and say, yes, 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 that was. Yes, that was a microaggression, or yes, that was an aggression, and call it for what it is. But just moving forward, I think holding space, and sometimes we have that gap there, and maybe feeling a little isolated or a little lonely. Law school in and of itself can feel a little lonely. I mean, last night I made one of my grandmother and my mother's okra recipes, and I moved here from the South, from New Orleans, and I wish that I could go down the hallway and say to somebody, can you taste this? Can you look at this? I don't quite have that now, but I'm holding the space. I'm trying to hold that space here. That's what I would say.
All right. So, Coach, did I hear from you? All right. Okay, I already did. So I got distracted because we have a really good question, and here's where the community is willing to do the work. So they're going to ask, and they're asking now. So they want to put some teeth to what they can do. So this question is: over the past few years, there have been a huge fall off in particularly with faculty and staff engagement with the community. Is there an overall call to action that people can sink their teeth into? So what is it that we can call people to action that people can actually, you can't back away from, which is also what Representative Harrod said, we need to continue to keep calling into action. And once we vote people into office, it isn't over. We have to keep moving. And so what is it that we can overall do a call to action for the DU community? And I'm gonna let whoever would like to jump in there first jump in.
I'll jump in.
All right.
I think that, I thank you for the question, Michael. I think that I agree with you. I don't know if I can point to, I'm not an administrator or a faculty member or a teacher, so I can't point to like a thing that you could support or we could all get behind. But I do think just in general, just doing more, doing more to reach out, right? I love what's been said earlier about communication and really improving communication across the line. But I think it stems both ways. I think, faculty and staff, they're the closest things to the students. And I think they're the frontline workers in the sense of the university. And I think they are the ones in the best position to figure out and get a pulse on what's going on. That only happens if they want to do it, and if they, actually genuinely, if they want to or have to. We'd prefer want to, but because then the support and resources can come. I think that there's a lot of support at DU, a lot of support in the city, and there's a network of people that can get you what you need. But sometimes that burden that they carry doesn't allow them to always reach out and make that call. And that's where faculty members could be helpful in just doing that a little bit more to reach out and engage with their students.
Okay. I'm gonna keep pushing a call to action, because a want to do and a have to do, that puts us in this place. People, we do a have to do and we'll check off the mark and say, we did it and it's on. But a want to do is, when, what I like to say, what's my soul's work that I do regardless of whether I get paid for it. I do regardless of whether people are seeing me or watching me. I do it because I'm committed to it. So how do we put out a call to action to move us forward into this beloved community? into mutuality versus inclusivity?
I think, the Martin Luther King event on Monday, I think some of the, unfortunately, we have these kind of built-in holidays, these kind of built-in time. And I don't know for it at the time, yeah, obviously we want it to be a 365 type conversation. But we all know when Martin Luther King Day hits, okay, people are like, okay, next month is Black History Month and everybody's all, get going. And I think for using that momentum, I told our team they wanted to share, and it's right on our Twitter thread, their favorite Martin Luther King quote. And I was surprised because it was literally a day before someone suggested it. We hadn't really planned anything because I had something else planned for next month. And so I had a chance to share that first through sixth grade, I had a Black music teacher. And so that's when it always started for us, was Martin Luther King Day always started Black History Month. And it is here. So I think the call to action is to highlight those holidays that people know about that are coming, and then to try to make that a little bit more accessible to people, right? The call to action could be, everybody show up. Now Juneteenth is also a holiday here at DU. Obviously we have Women's History Month, but to show up for those events that everybody knows because it's a federal holiday, right? Everybody knows is on the schedule, and plan something that people can show up and be educated and also learn.
Awesome. Thank you. So you got to show up. They keep moving and show up and communicate. To also have that radically welcoming sense. And then Jennifer, share what's on your mind. You mute.
I would echo what has been said. I think that outreach and communication is important. And I think that everyday acts of freedom, whether it be, like I said, the kindness or resting a little bit more or reflecting, if you will, I think all of those things help to keep the momentum and help to change and shift cultures and culture in ways that we may not see it as we're doing it, but then when we look behind, we may see how far we've come.
Wow. Thank you. So I want to, for those who were there, we had an essay winner, 17-year-old Matthew White, who's a student at East High School. And I pulled a little excerpt from his speech. He won first place, and which comes with a $5,000 renewable scholarship to DU, choosing DU. And he said, in recent times, injustice continues to rear its ugly head, which tells us that we have a long way to go. This is a 17-year-old. Social media disseminates information faster than ever before, which allows the world to hear and see the unfair treatment that continues against people of color. Unbelievable stories and videos of police brutality surface and leave people shocked and afraid. We've lost lives for coming from our own garage, Andre Hill, from dancing to music while walking down the street, Elijah McClain, from walking up to the room full of strangers, Breonna Taylor, from playing with toys, Tamar Rice, and for having an air freshener hanging from a car mirror, Dante Wright. What was once hidden is now being displayed on every network, station, and media source available, causing all people to come together to fight for change, because injustice of one person has impacted everyone else. They are his inspiration for fighting for this justice. What do we say for those lives that we've lost, and how social media has played a role in this dual pandemic of medical and humanitarian issues?
I'll jump in. I got two things. I think that the social media is necessary in order for a lot of this stuff to get done, right? And I love this new, I don't know if you want to call it movement of folks pulling out their cameras and recording, because now it's not just stories that are told from people's mouths. It's not he said, she said versus the other person. We're out of that phase when we can prove it with videos and facts. Even as horrific as it is to see these things, and painful as it is to see these things, I think it's necessary for us to achieve some form of accountability for the loss of life in that realm. I also did. I came up with a kind of call to action that I wanted to comment on from the last question.
Awesome.
I'm going to steal a quote from John Lewis, the Honorable John Lewis, which is, be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? I think that's really what we're trying to get at here. And I try and live that, quote out in my life, and I just encourage others to try and do the same. And I think that it's not going to fix it, but it might move the pendulum a little bit closer.
Thank you, Nigel. Be comfortable with the uncomfortable. If you see something, say something. John Lewis. Coach Woods or Jennifer, last words. Don't be so nice to each other.
You can go ahead, Coach Woods, if you like.
You go ahead. I get my words together.
Sure, absolutely. I think that social media is important to this in terms of exposing injustices which have long happened. And one thing that I think is, of course, there's an advocacy component, but I also think, at least from a law perspective, that it confronts the system to behave in the way that it's intended to behave, despite the evidence that we have. And we see that with Rittenhouse, we see that with many other things, that despite the evidence, hasn't happened all the time as of late, but despite the evidence, how will it behave? And what kind of outcomes will we have? So I think social media is really critical in key to doing that, to promoting change.
Thank you.
That was good. And I would also add, of course, I think some of the reasons it's hard for us to move past racism or things that's happening because it's not as blatant as it was before, right? Where obviously none of us are picking cotton, we're not sharecroppers, we're not anything like that. So it's not as blatant. So I think social media is vital and it's important because honestly, in some ways you feel validated as Black people, right? You will say something and, people like, that didn't really happen. And then you get on and you're like, okay, here it is. And so not that everything needs to be validated, but I think it further proves our point why these types of conversations are necessary, why praying with your feet is necessary, why the Voter Act, all of those things are necessary because though it may not be as blatant as it was before, it still exists and it's ways that, again, it's our responsibility to do our share of the work, our share of praying for our feet, so we can then pass on that legacy to the next generation. I think for where we are in 2022, social media is a big proponent of that. It's a big reason why we even heard about George Floyd, why some of this movement even started, and also the pandemic. I think the pandemic was the first time that we had to sit here and sit in the racism. Every other time we've had a distraction, right? I can go to this sporting event, I can go to this concert, and we all can just go Black, white, and everything in between and sit there like, oh, nothing's happening. And now we're in a pandemic. And so you got to sit there and you got to we had to sit in it. We had to sit in it and all of these conversations and it is a result of that.
Thank you, Coach. And I think Chase is going to close us out. But before he closes out, I want us to remember some call to action. We need to have deliberate outreach to our communities. We need to be radically welcoming. We also need to, instead of inclusivity, we need to consider mutuality, respecting the humanity in each other. And that is, thank you, Nigel, Jennifer, and Coach Woods for the conversation. And we need to continue the conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. Couldn't have said it better. And thank you, Dr. Jordan Fields, for moderating such a powerful conversation. We do want to let folks know that one of our guiding principles with Community Plus Values is meet people where you're at, and we'll meet you there. And this is one of those conversations where we heard so much, and we want folks to think about where they're at in their journey and that everybody feels inclusion and belonging, and they truly belong at the BU community. And so as we keep going on, we'll have the additional Heritage Months events, and we do have other community building events coming up. Grab wellness snacks on Tuesdays from 1 to 3 in the Commons. Stop by Beans on Thursdays from 9 to 11 a.m. for free hot drink on C+V and 4D. And we hope that you'll visit the website and find other community building opportunities there and follow us on social media. And again, thank you all so much for being here with us this morning. This will be recorded and posted on the website too. So please share far and wide. And again, thank you and take care all.
Thank you.